I watched my grandfather twist the thick iron chain tied around my uncle's ankle that rainy summer, the heavy padlock clicking shut against the rough locust bark. Every villager who passed the pigsty alley spat crude insults, calling him a deranged monster who deserved to rot alone out there. I was 7 back then, the only person in the whole hamlet who snuck leftover food to him day after day. My father Jean de Gouet had zero patience for any shred of kindness I showed my uncle. He framed Hawaiian as a stain on our household name, while my grandfather claimed his supposed mental dysfunction made him too dangerous to keep under the same roof. My core motive for sneaking food to Hawaiian was simple. I saw no malice in his quiet, hollow eyes, only starvation and loneliness, and I couldn't stand watching another human being discarded like trash. Back then, my emotional state was just quiet, confused pity. I had no clue the family's cruelty was a deliberate cover-up for far darker crimes they'd buried beneath the locust tree. I'd hidden a half-steamed bun inside my worn linen shirt that afternoon, slipping through the mud puddles to crouch beside Hwai's chained form. The stench of stagnant sewage around the pigsty made my throat burn, but I held the bread out toward his dirt-caked hands. He hesitated a beat, then split the bun perfectly in two and pushed half back to me, his voice hoarse from weeks of disuse. "You eat too, kid." I shook my head, but he wouldn't relent, staring at me with those deep, calm eyes that never matched the village's vicious gossip. Before I could take the small piece of bread, heavy footsteps crunched behind me. De Gouet grabbed the back of my collar and hauled me upward in one sharp yank. The bun slipped out of my grasp and sank straight into the mucky mud. "Who told you to feed this worthless lunatic garbage?" De Gouet's voice boomed over the empty alley, rage thick in every syllable. I stared down at the mud-soaked bread instead of meeting his glare. "He's hungry." De Gouet's open palm crashed into my cheek without warning. The ringing hum flooded my ears, blurring my vision for a split second. Hwai shot to his feet instantly, the iron chain rattling loud enough to echo down the lane, his fists clenched tight like he planned to charge at my father to shield me. But the second de Gouet lifted the wooden pole hanging by the pigsty wall, Hwai's knuckles loosened completely. He didn't lunge, didn't shout, only stood motionless and took the blow across his shoulder when de Gouet swung the pole hard. I watched Hwai swallow every flinch of pain, his jaw locked tight to avoid making a single sound of protest. De Gouet rounded on me again and struck my other cheek, the second slap stinging worse than the first. Remember this lesson. He's a curse on our family, not some poor relative worth wasting food on. Hwai knelt down after de Gouet turned to storm off, wiped the mud off the ruined bun with the frayed cuff of his ragged shirt, and chewed the filthy crumb slow, one bite at a time. I stood there crying silent tears, staring at him as I processed the first contradiction I'd ever witnessed between the village's story and real behavior. A truly unhinged violent man wouldn't hold back from defending a 7-year kid who'd shown him kindness. That split second planted quiet doubt in my mind, yet I didn't have the context to piece together why the whole household lied about his sanity yet. When I ran back inside the house that night, my mother Chinmon dabbed herbal salve on my swollen cheeks, her hands trembling nonstop as she tended to me. I pressed her for answers about Hwai's past, and she froze, clamping a palm over my mouth to silence me instantly, glancing toward the door in terror of my father overhearing our conversation. She only whispered one crypt line before blowing out the oil lamp. "Don't ask questions about him, ever." After she left the room, I pressed my eye against the window crack and watched Hwai trace faint lines in the mud beneath the locust tree, while my father loomed a dozen paces away with a shovel clutched in his grip, monitoring every small movement Hwai made like a jailer guarding a high-risk prisoner. I couldn't decipher the writing he carved into the wet dirt, but the tension between them hung thick in the dark, and I knew without a doubt there was a secret buried beneath that tree no one was willing to speak of. The whole household slaughtered a chicken for dinner on my 7th birthday, yet every piece of meat was served to my cousin Zhang Hao, the favored grandson of my grandfather. Grandma refused to place a single chunk of poultry on my rice bowl, saying young boys like me only needed plain broth to fill our bellies. My mother secretly slipped a chunk of chicken breast onto my plate under the table, but de Gouet caught the motion and sneered loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. "You coddle this soft-hearted brat for nothing. He wastes food on that madman outside. He doesn't deserve decent meat." The other relatives laughed along with de Gouet, their mockery stabbing at my chest. A sudden clattering rattle from the pigsty chain cut through the dining room chatter, and everyone's head snapped toward the backyard. My second aunt snarled about Hwai ruining our celebration, and Grandpa ordered de Gouet to go silence him with the bamboo pole. I slipped out the back door right behind my father and found Hwai standing beneath the locust tree, his chained ankle rubbed raw and bleeding open, his gaze fixed straight on me through the window glow of our dinner table. De Gouet raised the pole and struck him hard across the shoulders once more. Hwai didn't dodge, only stretched out an open palm toward me as I sprinted forward to grab de Gouet's arm and pull him back. "Stop hitting him." De Gouet tossed me aside with one rough shove, threatening to drag Hwai deep into the remote mountain ravine if he kept lingering near the house after dark. Hwai's bloody palm opened to reveal a tiny grass cicada woven from dry straw, a delicate craft he'd spent days twisting together as a birthday gift for me. I reached out to take it, but Degoué lifted his leatherwork boot and crushed the woven figure flat into the mud before my fingers could touch it. Trash for trash, he spat at Huai. I stood frozen, hot tears spilling down my cheeks, while Huai's eyes glistened, but he didn't utter a single word of complaint. Later that night, after all the guests left and the rest of the family passed out drunk from rice wine, I snuck out to the pigsty with a heavy stone I'd dragged from the firewood shed. Huai begged me to go back inside before I got caught, but I'd fully made up my mind. My motive was to return the small kindness he'd given me and put an end to his endless torture at the hands of my blood relatives. Every swing of the stone against the rusted padlock sent sharp shocks at my wrist, my knuckles splitting open and dripping blood onto the lock's surface as I kept striking the metal hard. On the third heavy blow, the lock split clean open, the iron chain clattering to the mud ground. Huai wrapped his cold, thin arms around me for one brief second, whispering a quiet line into my ear that I wouldn't fully understand for 15 years. I haven't forgotten any of it. Don't tell them I left. Then he turned barefoot and vanished into the pitch-black wilderness beyond the village road. I stood alone holding the broken lock as the back door creaked open behind me, Degoué's slurred, enraged voice cutting through the night air. What have you done? I never tried to run or hide after Degoué caught me by the locust tree. He dragged me straight to the village's grain-drying square at dawn, gathering every local resident to stand witness as he screamed accusations that I'd released a deranged killer who would one day attack random townsfolk. Every neighbor jeered and hurled insults my way, calling me ungrateful, cursed, a wild child just as unhinged as my uncle. My cousin spat directly on my face while the crowd watched, and Degoué struck me another hard slap when I wiped the spit off my skin without cowering down. No single person stepped forward to defend me, not even my mother, who could only stand at the back of the crowd and cry silently without daring to interject against my father's rage. From that day forward, I became the household's designated scapegoat for every misfortune that befell the village or our family. When chickens went missing from coops, everyone blamed me. When local kids scraped their knees playing outdoors, adults claimed my bad luck cursed them. Degoué deliberately burned my high school admission letter the year I turned 15, refusing to let me pursue education, arguing a kid who'd freed a lunatic only deserved farm labor for the rest of his life. I took part-time loading and auto repair jobs in the town market every single night to scrape together money for my mother's chronic lung treatment, yet every cash stash I hid was repeatedly found and seized by Degoué to fund my cousin's new clothes and electronics. The last straw hit one brutal winter when my mother started coughing up blood nonstop. I'd saved 2 full years of manual labor earnings to pay county hospital fees, only to walk in on my cousin holding my bank card, Degoué and second aunt sitting on our living room sofa, approving of the theft. When I demanded my money back to rush my mother to medical care, Degoué dismissed my mother's life-threatening illness as a trivial female ailment that would pass with time. That exact moment, every lingering shred of familial attachment inside me faded completely. My internal emotional shift turned permanent soft grief into cold, methodical detachment. I stopped begging for kindness, stopped pleading for fairness, and began secretly documenting every theft, every beating, every act of exploitation my blood relatives subjected me to, waiting for the day a witness powerful enough to dismantle their whole fraud would come back into my life. That day arrived out of nowhere, when a long line of black luxury sedans rolled down our narrow village dirt road one afternoon, the lead vehicle's door opening to reveal the man I'd freed 15 years prior beneath the locust tree. I just clocked out of the town's auto repair shop that afternoon, grease crusted deep under my fingernails, the folded bank slip for my mother's upcoming lung scan tucked tight in my jacket inner pocket. For 2 years running, I'd worked double overnight shifts to hoard cash. Every cent was earmarked for her hospital fees, and I'd hidden the savings card inside a hollow brick on my bedroom wall to keep my father and cousin from rifling through my things. My motive for hiding the funds wasn't greed. It was survival. Over 15 years, they'd proven repeatedly they viewed every dollar I earned as communal property for my cousin's trivial luxuries, never once prioritizing my mother's failing health. My emotional state at this point was flat, controlled detachment. I'd long buried the childish hope that blood would earn me basic decency, and I operated solely off cold, calculated planning to secure my mom's safety. The narrow dirt road leading into our hamlet hummed with an unfamiliar low engine rumble that didn't match the beat-up farm tractors or beat-down passenger vans locals relied on. I paused halfway up the lane, wiping motor oil off my forearms on my work apron, and watched a line of polished black sedans round the distant village bend one after another. Uniformed male staff in tailored black suits stepped out of each vehicle the second the convoy rolled to a stop outside our family's dilapidated courtyard gate. I froze mid-step, my repair rag slipping from my grasp to land in the dust. He scanned the ramshackle row of village homes until his gaze locked directly onto me, standing alone beside the repair shop's metal tool rack. The crowd of gawking villagers swelled fast behind the convoy, murmurs rippling loud enough to carry across the empty road. Grandpa Zhang Qingshan stumbled out of our courtyard holding a crudely carved wooden cane, my father Degoué hot on his heels, both faces twisted into a performative warm welcome they'd never once shown Huaiyan when he was locked away. "Huaiyan, it's really you. Grandpa called out, voice artificially bright, the cane trembling in his grip. He hurried forward with open arms like he'd spent 15 years mourning our lost relative, every gesture a transparent act to mask the crimes they'd buried beneath the locust tree. Hwine didn't move to embrace him. He walked straight past Grandpa and Degue, cutting through the ring of onlookers until he stood directly in front of me. His suit jacket hung loose over broad shoulders built from years of backbreaking labor and corporate leadership. No trace of the emaciated boy chained to a tree trunk left in his frame. His voice stayed quiet, barely loud enough for only us two to hear over the village chatter. I've spent every year since that night searching for you, kid. My throat tightened so sharply I couldn't form a single sentence. All those years I'd been branded a lunatic's accomplice, beaten and robbed, denied education and medical support for my mother. He'd been out there building wealth and resources, hunting for a way to come back and dismantle the whole fabricated narrative my blood clan had forced the village to swallow. I didn't cry or raise my voice. My rational mind processed the revelation piece by piece before any emotion could surface. My motive to hold back an outburst was clear. I needed to observe how my family reacted to Hwine's return, catalog every panicked lie they spilled to cover their secrets before I laid out my own evidence. Degue stepped between Hwine and me, forcing a nervous grin, hands raised in a placating gesture meant to defuse tension. We looked for you everywhere after you ran off that night, son. Worry ate us alive all these years. Hwine's stare never left my father's face, cold and unflinching. If you'd spent half the effort searching that you spent chaining me to a pigsty and spreading rumors I was vile and insane, you would have found me within 3 days of my escape. Grandpa's fake smile fractured instantly. He fumbled for a new excuse, waving a hand toward the gathered village crowd to manufacture public sympathy. We had no choice. You were erratic, prone to outbursts. We locked you up to protect the whole village from harm. A low, bitter huff escaped Hwine's chest. I never struck a soul in my life. The only violent acts I endured came from your bamboo poles and Degue's fists. The village onlookers shifted restlessly. Half the elderly locals remembered watching Degue beat Hwine beneath the locust tree all those years ago, and the fabricated dangerous madman story began to fray at the edges for the first time in 15 years. Second Aunt pushed through the crowd to stand beside Grandpa, launching a rapid stream of emotional manipulation, leaning hard on the language of blood and familial obligation. Now that you've made your fortune, you can't hold old grudges against your own blood. We raised you, fed you all those years, even if we had to take harsh measures to keep order. Hwine didn't engage with her guilt tripping. He turned his head toward me again, ignoring the entire clan's desperate pleas for mercy. Where's your mother? I need to speak with her first. I snapped out of my frozen daze, remembering the crumpled hospital slip tucked in my jacket pocket. She's bedridden at the village clinic, coughing up blood nonstop. I've been saving for county hospital treatment, but every time I set cash aside, Dad and House steal my savings. The name Zhang Hao, my cousin, landed heavy in the air. Second Aunt's face bleached pale the second I spoke of the stolen funds. She'd watched my cousin grab my bank card off the living room table just 3 days prior and said nothing to stop him. Hwine's jaw tightened. A silent signal to his team lined up by the sedan's .2 suited men stepped forward, hands folded at their waists, waiting for his direct orders. Degue planted his body squarely in the dirt road, arms outstretched to cut off our route toward the small medical hut at the village's western edge. This is a family matter between men. No need to drag a sick woman into old grievances. We can sit at home, talk over tea, settle any bad blood between us properly. His tone shifted from fake warmth to sharp, commanding hostility the second Hwine signaled his team to follow us to the clinic. Grandpa shuffled forward to flank Degue, cane raised slightly as a subtle threat, a silent warning that they would use force to keep my mother isolated from Hwine's influence. I stepped around Degue's outstretched arms without slowing my pace, my tone flat, unshaken by his intimidation tactics. She's the only person in this household who never lied about what happened under that locust tree. You too don't get to control who she speaks to. Degue's temper snapped. He grabbed my upper arm hard enough to bruise, yanking me backward away from Hwine's side. You're still my son, and you'll obey my word on this. Hwine's security personnel moved in one fluid motion, gently prying Degue's fingers off my bicep and separating him from me, without throwing a single punch. No violence was exchanged, just a clear demonstration that Degue no longer held power to bully or restrain me, now that Hwine stood beside me as an ally. Degue sputtered, wild accusations spilling out in a rush to regain the village's favor, screaming that Hwine had brought outside thugs to terrorize his own blood family. The crowd split down the middle. Younger villagers watched the confrontation with open curiosity, while the older townsfolk's memories resurfaced, murmuring about the countless afternoons they'd watched Degue beat a chained, defenseless Hwine beneath the locust tree. Their long-held bias against me and my uncle began to shift, the lunatic narrative losing credibility by the minute. This was the first wave of third-party jury opinion swinging to our side, matching Template 2's witness reversal beat. We continued walking the short stretch to the clinic, Digouet, Grandpa, second aunt, and How trailing a dozen paces behind us, all of them tense and visibly anxious at the thought of my mother revealing decades of concealed crimes. When we pushed open the clinic's flimsy wooden door, the old village Dr. Hans stood beside my mother's cot, his posture rigid the instant Hawaiian crossed the threshold. A flicker of guilty panic crossed his face before he plastered on a neutral professional expression, and that micro-twitch registered clearly in my memory, another loose thread to pull when I dug up full proof later. My mother's skin was ashen, thin cotton sheets drawn tight up to her chin, a metal sputum basin sitting beside the bed filled with flecks of red blood. When she lifted her eyes and recognized Hawaiian, quiet tears streamed down her cheeks, no performative theatrics, only raw, exhausted relief after 15 years of forced silence. Hawaiian, I thought I'd never live to see you again. Hawaiian pulled a spare wooden chair beside the cot and sat, leaning forward to listen as she spoke, letting the rest of us stand back to give them space to talk. Grandpa tried to barge into the small examination room to cut her off mid-sentence, but Hawaiian's guard stationed at the door blocked his entry without effort. Trapped outside, the clan began to whisper rapid, panicked plans to each other, and I caught fragments of their scheme. They intended to rush back to our house that evening to burn hidden documents buried in the west wall, documents that held proof of their murder and asset fraud. I memorized every word they exchanged, filing this critical clue away for my next round of evidence gathering. Hawaiian's assistant slipped a black, encrypted tablet into his lap while my mother paused to catch her breath between sentences. He tapped the screen once, angling the display so both I and my mother could read the printed investigative summary laid out in crisp digital text. The report laid bare the full financial conspiracy predating Hawaiian's wrongful imprisonment. My grandfather Zhang Qingshan had accumulated massive gambling debts he could repay to a local creditor named Foam. Hawaiian's mother Shinyume owned a plot of high-value farmland and a dowry cash reserve Grandpa planned to seize to clear his debts. When Shinyume refused to sign her property over to him, Grandpa and Digouet conspired to eliminate her, then framed Hawaiian as a mentally unstable troublemaker to remove the only legal heir who could contest their stolen assets. I stared at the line-item breakdown of the forged land transfer documents scanned onto the screen, my internal emotional shift slow but irreversible. For 15 years, I'd assumed their hatred of Hawaiian stemmed from random cruelty. Now I understood every beating, every chain, every fabricated rumor had a cold monetary motive behind it. They viewed him as an obstacle to stolen wealth, just as they'd viewed me as a disposable labor source to fund my cousin's frivolous spending. My mother's hand trembled as she reached out to touch the tablet screen, recounting how she'd hidden Shinyume's original will and property deeds inside a rusted metal box buried in our home's west brick wall, precisely the documents the clan planned to incinerate that night to erase all evidence of theft. Hawaiian's gaze hardened as he read through the full investigation file. He turned to address Digouet, who'd managed to squeeze past the guard and hover in the doorway of the examination room. All of your fabricated stories about my supposed madness exist solely to cover the theft of my mother's inheritance, isn't it? Digouet's mouth opened and shut repeatedly, no coherent life forming to counter the digital proof laid out before the entire room of witnesses. Second aunt jumped in to deflect blame, claiming Grandpa's gambling troubles were just youthful mistakes, and the land transfers had been voluntary gifts from Shinyume, thin, transparent excuses that didn't hold up against the dated legal scans on the tablet. Hawaiian rose from the chair beside my mother's bed, sliding the tablet into my hands for me to keep as a copy of the preliminary evidence. We're not leaving this village tonight. We'll retrieve the metal box from your west wall before they get a chance to burn every last piece of proof they've hidden for 15 years. Digouet lunged forward to snatch the tablet out of my grasp, but I stepped sideways out of his reach, clutching the device tight against my chest. Every small, desperate act of sabotage from my blood relatives only reinforced how hollow their claims of family loyalty truly were. We exited the clinic minutes later, Hawaiian security team flanking my mother's transport stretcher to move her to a county hospital with proper emergency care, while Grandpa, Digouet, and their children scrambled back toward our courtyard to execute their plan to destroy the buried will and deeds. I followed close behind Hawaiian, fully ready to intercept them before they erased the only tangible proof of their decades-long fraud. We drove back to the family compound at a steady pace, 2 security vehicles flanking our sedan to block any escape routes for Grandpa, Digouet, and the rest of the clan. I gripped the encrypted tablet holding preliminary land fraud evidence tight in my lap, every line of the investigator's report looping through my head on repeat. My core motive for rushing back ahead of them was simple self-preservation and justice. If they burned the metal box hidden in the west wall, all legal proof of stolen inheritance and Shinyume's murder would vanish forever, leaving Hawaiian and my mother with zero way to hold them accountable for 15 years of abuse and theft. Internally, I'd long shed childish sadness over blood ties. Now I operated purely on cold, systematic logic, ready to lay every hidden crime bare before witnesses and official authorities. The second our tires crunched over the yard's dirt threshold, thick gray smoke billowed out from the small box storage hut attached to the shrine. Second aunt stood guard at the doorway with a metal poker in her grip, tossing loose scrap paper into the roaring flame while Grandpa knelt beside the fire pit feeding rolled documents into the embers. Degouet paced back and forth beside them, barking rushed orders to how to dig the rusted tin box out of the wall cavity and hurl it straight into the blaze. Hawaiian security teams split off in two coordinated groups. Half cut off the hut's exit to block escape. The rest moved to smother the open fire with damp burlap sacks before more paperwork incinerated. I bolted past the stunned clan members straight to the brick wall they'd pried open, a jagged rectangular hole gaping where they'd chipped away mortar that afternoon. Inside the hollow cavity sat the dented iron biscuit tin my mother had described hours prior. I reached in and pulled it free, dust coating every inch of the metal surface, its latches rusted shut from years sealed away. Degouet lunged at me the second I lifted the box out of the wall, his hands outstretched to tear it from my arms. One security guard stepped between us effortlessly, catching his wrists mid-swing and pinning them behind his back without landing a single blow. Grandpa dropped his fire poker and rushed to intervene, yelling wild accusations that Hawaiian's hired men were attacking family, but the village neighbors who'd followed our convoy crowded into the yard and watched silently. Their earlier bias had already shifted after the clinic revelations, and no one rushed to defend Grandpa's desperate cover-up. I set the tin box down on the stone courtyard table and worked the rusted lock open with a small screwdriver from my repair shop keychain. Layer upon faded cloth wrapped the contents inside, and I peeled each fabric sheet away one at a time, laying every document flat for the crowd of onlookers to read line by line. First emerged Shen Yume's handwritten last will, clearly stating all land, house, and personal dowry assets belonged solely to her son Hawaiian upon her passing. Next came stamped county land deeds with forged transfer signatures scrawled by Grandpa, plus decades of his handwritten gambling debt ledgers detailing exactly why he needed to seize Hawaiian's mother's property. At the very bottom of the stack rested a half-burned letter my mother had salvaged 15 years prior, the partial text detailing Grandpa and Degouet's plan to drown Hawaiian in the river then lock him up as a lunatic to eliminate the only legal heir standing in their way. I scanned the faces of the villagers as they leaned in to read the paperwork. Their quiet murmurs turned into open outrage. For 15 years, they'd spat at Hawaiian and shunned me, believing the family's manufactured madman lie, and now tangible written proof dismantled every false story they'd been fed. This third-party jury fully shifted to our side, their judgment complete without a single word of defense left for Grandpa and Degouet. My internal emotional shift landed here. I no longer felt bitter about the village's past cruelty. They'd only been misled by calculated deception, and the evidence had spoken for itself to correct their bias. Grandpa saw the will laid out on stone, and lost all pretense of calm composure. He began screaming that the documents were forged fabrications, demanding the crowd ignore what they'd seen, but Hawaiian pulled out a scanned digital copy of Shen Yume's archived notary file from the tablet, matching every handwriting stroke on the physical will to official county records. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, drowning out Grandpa's hollow denials. Hawaiian gestured for a gray-haired elderly man to step forward from the crowd, and I recognized M.R.G. instantly from my mother's earlier clinic testimony. He clutched a leather briefcase tight to his chest, his hands trembling slightly as he unzipped it to pull out a sealed official witness affidavit stamped with town civil bureau seals. I hid this statement for 15 years out of fear of retaliation. M.R.G. told the gathered villagers, his voice steady despite visible nerves. The day Shen Yume came to my home, her arms and torso covered in fresh bruising, she told me her husband Zhang Qingshan and stepson Degouet threatened to take all her land if she refused to sign property papers. She wrote this affidavit and handed me a spare residence key, saying if she went missing or passed unexpectedly, I was to deliver proof to Hawaiian once he could safely return without being locked away again. He laid the typed, hand-signed statement beside the will on the stone table, and every villager craned their necks to read the full account. M.R. Gu further produced an antique metal storage locker key from his briefcase, explaining the town post office's abandoned safe held additional bank records proving Grandpa drained all of Shen Yume's savings within weeks of her suspicious death. Degouet's knees buckled under him, collapsing onto the dirt yard ground without a sound. All his performative rage and loud accusations vanished completely. He sat motionless, staring at the witness paperwork in stunned silence. No more lies left to invent to shield himself. Second Aunt grabbed Hao's arm and tried to slip through the crowd to sneak away, but two village women blocked their path, refusing to let them flee from the truth they'd all participated in hiding. Hawaiian pulled out his cell phone and dialed the local police department's criminal investigation unit, listing every crime committed by the family line by line: unlawful long-term imprisonment, fraud via forged land deeds, intentional cover-up of homicide, bribery of medical staff to create false mental health diagnoses for Hawaiian, theft of my labor earnings over 15 years, and arson attempt to destroy material evidence. The dispatcher confirmed patrol officers would arrive at the village compound within 20 minutes. Grandpa scrambled forward and grabbed my ankle as I turned to step away from the stone table, his grip tight and desperate, begging for mercy and claiming blood kinship should erase all charges against them. I stared down at his gnarled fingers wrapped around my leg, my tone flat and unyielding, rooted in every choice he'd forced me to endure for over a decade. 15 years you locked an innocent man to a pigsty. 15 years you stole every dollar I earned to spoil Hal. 15 years you covered up a murder and lied to an entire village to steal land that never belonged to you. Blood ties don't erase every crime you chose to commit. I pulled my foot free of his grasp without hesitation, stepping back to stand beside Hawaiian and my mother's transport stretcher parked at the yard gate. Grandpa's pleas dissolved into hoarse, hysterical sobs as he realized none of us would negotiate or offer leniency. 2 marked police vehicles rolled into the village lane minutes later, uniformed officers stepping out with evidence collection bags, cameras, and official witness statement forms. They separated Grandpa, Digwe, Second Aunt, and Hal into 4 distinct interrogation groups to record individual statements, and the clan's fragile, fake solidarity shattered instantly. Digwe was the first to throw Grandpa under official scrutiny, admitting every gambling debt motive and recanting all fabricated stories about Hawaiian's supposed insanity, laying full blame for Shinyume's death on his father's violent outbursts. Second Aunt testified Grandpa forced her to accept Shinyume's stolen gold jewelry years prior, detailing how she paraded the heirloom around town while lying about its origin. Hal admitted he'd repeatedly stolen my savings cards on his father and grandfather's orders, confessing he'd known all along the cash was meant for my mother's critical lung treatment. Grandpa alone refused to cooperate, shouting wild denials to officers until investigators presented Mr. Gu's notarized affidavit and the post office locker key, at which point he fell silent and refused to answer any further questions. Every villager who'd gathered volunteered as third-party civilian witnesses, signing official police paperwork detailing the years they'd watched Hawaiian chained beneath the locust tree and Digwe's repeated public beatings. The full weight of their long-term complicity in the family's lies hit the village crowd hard, many hanging their heads in quiet shame as they submitted their witness signatures to law enforcement. Officers loaded Grandpa, Digwe, Second Aunt, and Hal into the back of patrol vehicles one by one to transport them to the county detention center pending formal criminal charges. Before the doors slammed shut, Digwe glanced at me through the car window, a hollow look of regret on his face, but I felt zero sympathy. His remorse only surfaced after capture, not during 15 years of exploiting my labor and abusing Hawaiian. Hawaiian arranged for a private medical ambulance to transfer my mother to a top-tier city pulmonary hospital that same afternoon, covering every surgical, medication, and rehabilitation cost in full out of his own corporate funds. I stayed by her hospital bedside for weeks as she recovered from life-threatening pulmonary hemorrhage, while legal teams compiled all evidence to file civil lawsuits reclaiming every stolen land asset and monetary compensation for years of emotional and physical harm. 1 year after the criminal court rulings handed down multi-year prison sentences for Grandpa, Digwe, Second Aunt, and Hal for fraud, unlawful detention, manslaughter cover-up, and arson conspiracy, I stood on the newly reclaimed farmland that had once belonged to Hawaiian's mother. The county court fully voided all forged land transfer documents, returning every acre of property to Hawaiian's legal ownership, and a separate civil judgment awarded me substantial financial restitution for every wage they'd stolen from my youth labor. Hawaiian gifted half the recovered farmland to me as permanent property, stating it was partial repayment for the night I'd broken his chains and given him a chance to escape 15 years of torture. I renovated a small quiet cottage on the land's western edge, far from the old village compound filled with painful memories, and opened my own independent auto repair shop on the town's main thoroughfare, no longer forced to hide my earnings or watch my hard work get seized for someone else's trivial luxury purchases. My mother fully recovered after surgery, living with me in the cottage, free from decades of fear and emotional manipulation at the hands of her abusive in-laws. The village slowly rebuilt its reputation after the criminal cases concluded. The townsfolk who'd once shunned me now regularly brought their vehicles to my repair shop, apologizing for the years they believed the Zhang clan's fabricated lies. Hawaiian built a rural youth scholarship foundation on the recovered farmland, funding free high school and college tuition for impoverished village kids who faced family exploitation similar to what we'd endured together. He never sought grand public vengeance against the village, only pushed for permanent local education support to ensure no child would ever be scapegoated and robbed of their future the way I had been. I rarely visited the old hamlet after settling on the farmland. The locust tree beneath which Hawaiian had been chained still stood at the abandoned compound's backyard, but the rusted chain and broken lock were long gone, hauled away as police evidence during the investigation. I no longer carried the weight of 15 years of suppressed anger or unfulfilled desire for familial love. My victory was never about screaming accusations or cruel retaliation against my blood relatives. It was the quiet, steady freedom of earning and owning every piece of my own life, protecting my mother, and helping other vulnerable young people avoid the cycle of exploitative family manipulation we survived. I'd spent 15 years enduring every form of unfair treatment in silence, clinging to faint hope blood might mean basic kindness. When every boundary was repeatedly violated, I didn't erupt into rage or public outbursts. I simply documented every crime, waited for the critical witness to return, and let tangible evidence, official law, and impartial third-party judgment deliver complete, irreversible justice. I lived fully for myself and my mother at last, unshackled from every toxic lie and stolen future the Jean clan had tried to bury me under.